When we talk about food and, sensitivities and stuff, gluten is something that seems to always be, a hot topic. People want to understand it. So we're doing a deep dive today on gluten intolerance. And we're using a surprising source. We're going to be talking about a blog by an 8-year-old blogger named Ari.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
This 8-year-old blogger, Ari, has broken down some of the important things to know about gluten. And so we're going to use that blog today to kind of walk us through gluten intolerance.
It's amazing how someone so young can break down such a complex topic. I mean, it just goes to show you that anyone can understand this
Right.
if an 8-year-old can.
An 8-year-old. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is gluten and why is it a problem?
So gluten is a protein, and it's found in grains like wheat, rye, and barley. And you can kind of think of gluten like glue. It helps hold food together and gives it that nice chewy texture. But for some people, their body reacts to gluten like it's some foreign invader, like it's a threat. And this is where we get into, gluten intolerance, specifically something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity, or NCGS.
So not celiac disease, but still a sensitivity.
Exactly.
What's the difference?
So celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder. And when someone with celiac disease eats gluten, it actually damages their small intestine. NCGS, on the other hand, it still involves your body reacting badly to gluten, but it doesn't cause that intestinal damage. However, it can still lead to a whole bunch of uncomfortable symptoms.
And Ari does not hold back in describing those symptoms. They actually paint a very vivid picture of what it feels like to have a gluten intolerant flare up. And one of the most common things they talk about is, of course, tummy troubles.
Yeah, those digestive issues, they're often the most, noticeable sign. We're talking bloating. Ari describes it as feeling like you swallowed a balloon. You get cramps, diarrhea, and even constipation. These are all signs that your gut is just not happy with the gluten.
And it's incredible how something happening in your gut can impact so much more than just, your digestion. Ari mentioned struggling with fatigue, almost like they're running on half an energy bar after eating gluten. What's the connection there?
So what's interesting here is that when someone with NCGS eats gluten, it can lead to inflammation in the gut. And this inflammation can actually interfere with your body's ability to absorb nutrients from food properly, including nutrients that are vital for energy production.
Yeah.
So you end up feeling drained and sluggish, even if you're technically eating enough.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's like your body's diverting all of its energy to fighting off this gluten, and then it leaves little left over for anything else. And it's not even just the gut and energy levels. Ari talks about these intense headaches that gluten seems to trigger.
Oh yeah, headaches are a really common symptom for people with NCGS.
It makes you wonder, what's going on there? Why would eating something cause that kind of pain?
Well, the exact mechanisms are still being studied. But there's some research that suggests gluten might trigger an inflammatory response. And not just in the gut, but also in the nervous system, including the brain. So this inflammation in the brain could be what's causing those really intense headaches.
Interesting. So it's like this chain reaction starting in the gut and then affecting other parts of the body. And it's not even just our insides. Ari mentions gluten affecting their skin too, causing rashes and itchiness.
Right. And for some people, those skin problems can be really frustrating.
Is there any way to know what's causing are there different reactions for different things, or is it all just kind of lumped together as gluten intolerance?
So there's actually a specific condition called dermatitis herpetiformis. And it's this super itchy, blistering skin rash that's directly linked to gluten intolerance.
Dermatitis herpetiformis? That sounds serious.
Yeah, it can be. It's not as common as some of the other symptoms we've talked about,
Yeah.
but it definitely shows that gluten can have really far-reaching effects beyond just digestion.
Wow. It's like your body's trying to send you a message loud and clear. And speaking of messages, Ari also talks about experiencing something called brain fog after eating gluten. What is brain fog exactly?
Brain fog is basically like that feeling of mental fuzziness. It's like your brain is just kind of moving in slow motion. You might have trouble concentrating or remembering things or just feeling mentally sharp in general.
So it's not just feeling tired, it's actually affecting your ability to think clearly.
Yeah, exactly. And it can make everyday tasks that require focus really difficult.
That sounds incredibly frustrating. And on top of everything else, Ari even mentions having achy joints after eating gluten.
Joint pain is another symptom that can be linked to gluten intolerance.
Is it a widespread thing with NCGS, or is it more specific?
Well, it's not as common as, say, the digestive issues, but for some people, consuming gluten can trigger an inflammatory response in their joints.
So with this long list of potential symptoms, from digestive issues to headaches to brain fog to skin rashes, even joint pain, like how do you know if gluten is actually the culprit? Is there a test you can take? So if you're listening to all this and you're like, wait a minute, some of this sounds familiar, what should you do?
Well, first of all, don't panic.
Right.
It's really important not to self-diagnose.
Right.
If you think you might be having a reaction to gluten, the best thing to do is talk to a doctor.
Makes sense. They can help figure out if it's actually gluten or something else entirely, right?
Yeah.
So you wouldn't recommend just like cutting out gluten cold turkey and seeing what happens?
Not without talking to a medical professional first. There
Yeah.
isn't like a single test for NCGS. So it often involves a bit of detective work,
Mhm.
talking about your medical history, keeping track of your symptoms, maybe doing some blood tests to rule out celiac disease.
So it's not quite as simple as just like, oh, I think I have this, I'll just stop eating that.
Right. It's a little more involved.
Yeah.
And sometimes the doctor might even recommend an elimination diet.
What is an elimination diet exactly?
Basically, it's where you completely cut out gluten from your diet for a certain period of time, and then you carefully monitor how you feel.
So kind of like a gluten trial run?
Yeah, you could think of it that way.
But if you do end up needing to go gluten-free, is that like a lifelong sentence to boring food?
Not at all.
Really? Because I'll be honest, my first thought is like rice cakes and celery sticks.
I get it. Gluten-free used to have kind of a bland reputation, but honestly, the gluten-free food scene has exploded in recent
Sure
years.
kidding.
There's so much out there now.
Like what?
Gluten-free breads, pastas, crackers, cereals, you name it. It might take a little experimentation to find your new favorites, but there are definitely some really delicious options.
That's good to hear. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
It has.
It's amazing how something as seemingly simple as gluten can have such wide-ranging effects on the body.
It really makes you stop and think about all the other things that might be impacting our health in ways we don't even realize.
Right. Absolutely. Well, that's something to ponder, isn't it? Thanks for joining us for this deep dive on gluten intolerance, everyone. And remember, if you're experiencing any of the symptoms we've talked about, don't hesitate to reach out to a healthcare professional. Until next time.